Rabbi Sai Azoi. If you see someone's animal falling on the road or a heavy load falling off of the animal, don't hide away. Help the owner out. Lo sir es chamor achicha v'salamta mehem, says the pasuk. Lighten his lift. Yet back in Parshas Mishpatim, there's a very similar verse, but notice a slight difference in phraseology. Instead of chamor achicha, it says Lo tire chamor sonecha roivet tachas masai. Why did the Torah change from referring to your enemy's donkey in Parshas Mishpatim to referring to your brother or your friend's donkey in this week's Parsha? My hi. That's not my question. That's a question of Rabbi Simcha of Dvinsk, otherwise known by the names of his phenomenal Sfarim, the Ohr Somayach on the Rambam and the Meshech Chochmah on Chumash. Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak Ruderman, who later became the Rosh Yeshiva of Meir in Baltimore, relates that when a copy of the Ohr Somayach reached the yeshiva in Slobodka, great excitement greeted the Sefer, and the Bochurim really wanted to get a chance to read it, to learn it. So they made a rota that each Bocher was allowed only a half-hour slot with the Sefer Ohr Somayach, even though that meant that some of them stayed up till 3 a.m. to get their chance with the Sefer. Born in 1843, Rabbi Simcha got married at the age of 17 and lived for the next 27 years in Bialystok before eventually agreeing to take a position as a Rov in Dvinsk, where he served for the last 39 years of his life. Rabbi Simcha was the Rov of the Misnagdim community. The Rov of the Hasidic community in Dvinsk was the great Rogatchover Gaon, and despite their difference in outlook and their difference in personality, they had a tremendously respectful relationship. In fact, the Ohr Somayach would often say of the Rogatchover, don't think he's got such a special memory, he simply chazes all of Shas every month. On the Ohr Somayach's kever it says, B'moisoi lo hiniach acharav k'moisoi. Perhaps that hints to the fact that Rabbi Simcha did not have any descendants after him. His one daughter died during his own lifetime, and his son-in-law, Rav Avram Lufter, an esteemed Talmid Chacham, was also nifter at a young age. But what a legacy of Torah and Torah leadership he left. Known in his lifetime as a Sar HaTorah, he was referred to even by the Chofetz Chaim and Rav Chaim of Dvinsk as being the Gadlus Ohr. And in fact, they were mevatel their das, his das Torah, on questions of religious leadership on many occasions. Now back to our question about helping to lift the load of the animal's owner. Why wasn't in Parshas Mishpatim referred to chamor sonecha, whereas in this week's Parsha it's changed to chamor achicha? Rav Meir Simcha answers pointed to a Gemara Psachim, which asks a question on the pasuk in Mishpatim. How can it say chamor sonecha? It's asa to hate someone. Lo tisnes achicha b'levavecha. Answers the Gemara, it must be speaking about the type of person that you've seen doing an aveira. That person one can have an attitude of sinner towards. Says a Meshech Chochmah, that was all back in Parshas Mishpatim, where we were a goy kadosh mamleches kohanim. Then it was possible to have an attitude of distance, to hold oneself on a pedestal. But now we're in Parshas Tetze, that's after Matan Torah. After Matan Torah, where there was Chet Egel and all other types of mistakes of the Dor HaMidbar. Now we're all in the same boat. You think that sinner is so different to you? Don't hold yourself on a pedestal. Check out your own actions. You might find you've got plenty of your own problems. And therefore now in Parshas Tetze, we refer to chamor achicha, no longer chamor sonecha. What an apt message from the Meshech Chochmah. With all of his tzidkus and Torah brilliance, he had every right to hold himself on a pedestal. And yet he was so mu'urav in habrios. There are countless stories of how people would come to him, young couples, for shalom bayis advice. In fact, many people called their sons Meir Simcha because they felt that the only reason they were still married was thanks to his guidance. People would come to Dvinsk to ask him for advice and to get brachas, even the local goyim. Check out this amazing story. One winter in Dvinsk, it was so cold that the river which ran through the city entirely froze over. But as the spring arrived and the weather warmed up, the ice started to melt, but it was actually threatening to flood the entire city, endangering its inhabitants. As they feared that the river would overflow its banks, panic and fear spread throughout the city. They sent to fetch Rabbi Simcha, who was in shul engrossed in his davening. He emerged in his talis and walked calmly towards the river. He stood there on the embankment as the entire city watched him davening. And as the words came out of his mouth, the waters started to recede, looking like they were running away from the Torah greatness of the great Meshech Chochmah. One of the striking things about this story is we know about it from an unusual source. Issa Harel was the head of the Israeli Secret Services in the 1950s and early 1960s. He presided over some great Israeli achievements, including the capture and eventual execution of the Nazi Adolf Eichmann from Argentina. Issa Harel had been standing there as a young boy near the embankment in Dvinsk, watching the Ohr Somayach daven. Even though he made a very significant departure from the religious lifestyle in which he was brought up and which Meir Simcha certainly espoused, listen to the great reverence, decades later, with which he refers to the Ohr Somayach in his memoirs. Meir Simcha did not view the subsiding of the waters as a miracle, nor did he see himself as a holy man. He went to pour out his supplication before God, not to perform wonders. And he also notes the great impact and Kiddush Hashem which Meir Simcha's davening and the moifes had around the entire city of Dvinsk. The tone of Issa Harel's words speaks volumes about how the great Meir Simcha of Dvinsk lived that very lesson which he teaches us about Chamor Achicha. A good Shabbos.